Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Point of More Returns. I'm your gracious host, a masked investor. With me, we have Welfare. Welfare, how are we today?
Mass investor, I am well, man. How are you? How are things your way?
Doing good. Doing really good. I appreciate you for asking that. It's a good day in the neighborhood. Deals are moving forward, and spring is in the air. So we're in good spirits over here.
That's good, man. I'm glad to hear that.
Yes, indeed. And well, without further ado, we are doing a little something different from time to time. I wouldn't say take a pause. We also harp on kind of all aspects of the deal. We try to, in addition to that, the personal part sometimes that comes into, which could be most important, really, just how you have your support structure, your personal life in order for you to support your deal efforts. Because obviously, if things are falling apart in other places, it's definitely going to creep in and impact your ability to get those deals done. And so today we're going to talk about something that we've been seeing and Welfare and I have been banding about for some time. And it's just the support of your spouse. Is it paramount to getting a deal done? Can you get a deal done in spite of it? Do you need support? And what does that support look like and mean when you have it behind you? And so, Welfare, I'll let you talk a little bit about your stance on it, and we'll come back to me.
I appreciate that. Yeah, this is definitely a topic that I don't think gets talked about enough or people put enough emphasis on in terms of your spouse or life partner. As everyone knows at this point, if you've listened to the pod, I'm a follower of Warren Buffett, and I read as much as I can about his philosophy, psychology in terms of life and business. And this was many years ago that I read this, but he said the most important indicator of if you'll be successful in business is who you select as your spouse or life partner. And I always thought that was very, very interesting because in my mind, that can't be the number one key to business. Is, it could be, how you analyze a deal, or it could be how diligent you are, or, how undervalued the assets that you find that you invest in. But no, Warren Buffett said the number one indicator to your success is who you select for your spouse or life partner. So with that being said, I do think it's very important. I think it's critical, and it's critical for a myriad of reasons, which we can get into, but I do think it has some level of credence. I think there's a lot of truth in that. And I also think who your spouse is and where they are and how you incorporate them either in your business or decide to not incorporate them in your business, that also is an indicator of your success. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, but that's just my initial reaction to the question.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with Buffett about that approach. And again, we talked about this from time to time. And what really sparked it most recently was there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about Stefano Pessina, who basically built a $100 billion empire from Walgreens. And one of the things that stood out about the empire is that he met his wife in the earlier stages of doing his deals when he actually acquired her company. And sat back and we kind of debated on whether or not she probably played a key role in him getting to $100 billion. And the reason why we say that is because she understood the lifestyle. She probably knew what it took. She's been through a deal herself, so she knows what he was going through. She knew when to push on the lever, when to pull back, what he may be needing or what he may not be seeing around the corners, because all of us have blind spots. And so with her looking on the outside, I'm sure she probably may have had his back in some areas where he may not initially have seen. And as such, he was able to get to $100 billion valuation for his company. Now, obviously, it may be, some of you may be saying, oh, well, it's all for moot because he just recently sold to private equity for $10 billion. But still, the fact that at one point you were able to build that stable up to such an immense valuation, I can't help but wonder or say that, he wouldn't have been able to do it without his spouse, at least allowing him to do that. I'm sure we've seen relationships where Some people may not have the support of their spouse. Their spouse is calling them away from their calling or from trying to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish in business. And it can actually be kind of a weight on your back. And with that type of weight, some people are still strong enough to be able to pull that weight along with them, even though it's dragging them down, slowing them down, but they're still able to accomplish somewhat in spite of. But you can't help but wonder, right? Well, fair whether or not they could have gone a lot further if they had wind at their sails instead of rocks being thrown at their tank. What do you say about that?
Okay, so let's break that down because you just said a lot. I think there are three, and this is just me talking off the cuff, but I think there are three potential buckets you can talk about in terms of categorizing your spouse and where they are in terms of your business journey. One could be full-on support, where they're working in the business, they're putting money to invest in the business, or they're providing some type of support, whether it's taking care of the kids or some domestic work that would take time away from you focusing on the business. So that's one category, is full on support. The other one is, as you like to quote, throwing rocks at the tank. And that means full on. It's the antithesis of what I just said. It's full on non-support. And they're not supportive of the business, and they are sort of detractors in that way. And then I think there's a third bucket, and it's pretty much the medium version of somewhat supportive, hands off, don't really want anything to do with that, but I won't prevent you from pursuing your dream or doing whatever it is, but not necessarily a lot of involvement. So needless to say, out of the three buckets, you don't necessarily have to talk about the one that is the non-support, because we know what that looks like. It's just they're not helping. I feel like the media shows a lot of the times where the spouse or the spouses work together, they build the business. One may take the lead role, and then the other might be a little bit more behind the scenes. Those are always great stories. Those are always great success stories. People are always interested in that because there's a love component, there's a business component, it's success. It's a level of idealism, like what hashtag relationship goals people were saying at one point. But I don't think in the media that they really talk about the person who has a spouse who just is supportive but doesn't necessarily have a hand in the business, or is very hands off, or they just are a spouse and they don't necessarily play a key role in it. I can't even think of any real examples. I have to try to Google it, but I don't think that gets talked about enough. So I guess the question is, do we want to go down the path of talking about, hey, what it looks like to try to get your spouse to be more supportive in the business? Or do you want to talk about, hey, what it looks like if your partner is not wanting to play a role in the business, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think we, for our audience, it'd be good to have situation for both, right? Because, ideally some of us are able to find spouses and be able to spot red flags ahead of time and avoid those who may be combative. But some of us may not be as fortunate. We may already be down that road, and only to find later that, things may have changed and ideals or objectives are kind of shifted. And so I guess I want to also add to this that typically on this podcast, we normally stick to topics that we've actually accomplished in life and at least have some degree of expertise. But this is that rare episode where both of us ourselves may not have it 100% figured out. We've taken some lumps and bruises along the road and hope to share our experience in this, on what we've seen work thus far, and then maybe also add in a little theory on things that maybe we would have done differently in hindsight, in hopes that you as a listener can learn and cut the time in half in getting to your goal. But the first thing I guess I would say on that topic, though, is typically what you would do if you walk into an investment office, right? Is you're going to sit down and try to determine a risk tolerance for your spouse. Some spouses may be comfortable with you on 100 miles an hour on the highway, pedal to the metal, cutting things, just get rich or die trying. And some spouses are, that just frightens them to death. And so the first thing you want to try to understand is just that risk tolerance, I think, and making sure that you can walk this thing along at a pace that's agreeable to them. And so in that situation, I think it depends a degree on also your list of accomplishments and your skills as a navigator. Obviously, if Warren Buffett comes to a girl today, and he's got, $30 billion worth of net worth, and he's telling her, hey, let's put it all on X, I'm pretty sure about it. More than likely, she's probably a little bit more prone to go with it versus someone who's fresh out of college, who's unproven, doesn't have a degree of track record behind them to do that. So you also have to take into account that situation. What do you have to say about that?
I agree. So first we have to know ourselves. We have to be true to ourselves and true to our capabilities and what our aspirations are. And we have to make sure that's conveyed to our partners. That's the first thing. The other thing too is you have to be true to yourself about who you're with and who you've selected as your partner. To your point, I love that you're saying, hey, think about a risk profile. Are they risk averse? Do they have a high tolerance for risk? Have medium amount of risk that they're willing to take on? Because that also plays a role in it. And so if you know your partner is risk averse and you're asking them to do something that's super risky, probably going to have a very high hill to climb, to say the least. Or, the opposite, if they're wanting to take more risks and you don't, then that also puts you in a pickle. So really understanding who you're with, and then also understanding what the expectations are with the roles and responsibilities. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but even with Warren Buffett, his first wife, I don't necessarily remember her playing a critical role in the business, but she definitely took on the role with the kids and the house, and that's still assisting. That's still a major lift because that's alleviating some of the responsibilities that he would have. So it freed him up to spend more time thinking about the business and thinking about investing in returns. So I think it just is a matter, like I said, of really understanding who you're with and figuring out how to make it work and having those candid conversations of honesty of, hey, this is what I need. This is what I think it will actually help the family and be the most fruitful for our goals and dreams and where we're trying to go. And even before that is just really understanding, like, are you aligned with the aspirations are? That's sometimes an issue I don't think people necessarily have, is it's like, are you all even aspiring for the same things? I don't know if that always happens.
Yeah, agreed. It's funny you mentioned that. That was the next thing I was going to touch on. That in hindsight, the first thing I would have done when setting out is to sit down and really explain, where the ship is fully going. Make sure she, not just from a standpoint of, hey, we're going to do this. I'm trying to do this deal. It's going to be first deal was only a $300,000 deal, right? 100. So it's like, it's going to be a $300,000 deal. Obviously, they get the numbers, but more importantly, just outlining what to expect, right? In terms of what I'm going to need to do this deal, what I expect, what I feel like I could use from her, and just, more of the kind of mapping out an outcome from point A to point B better. Because one of the things that we ran into when doing the deal first initially was just the method in terms of, now she agreed, she was happy for me to do the deal, but the way that I was going about trying to get the capital in order to be able to do it. When we first got out, I graduated, I was trying to do the nuclear strategy with her, and she wasn't exactly comfortable with going nuclear, which, a lot of women aren't, right? There's just, let's just face it. Elon Musk is comfortable sleeping on a factory floor to go after his $1 billion. Maybe some of our other people may not be as comfortable to do that, even if there are millions at the end of it. So you just have to take that into account of what people are willing to do to accomplish the goal as well. Again, that's my pedal to the metal, going 100 miles per hour. Some people may need to walk it a little bit more slower. So it's a little bit more comfortable journey along the way. But another thing you have to take into consideration too that I didn't fully appreciate is like imagine like you had to get up every day and go to class, right? But nobody told you you were going to class to get a degree. You were just getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and you have to go to this god awful class and you don't know when the end of it's going to be or why you have to do it. And that's what it's like, being with a spouse if they don't know what the destination is going to be. So we have to be very, very clear about where you're headed, what's going to be at the end of it, what's in it for them, so that they don't feel like it's just some, long sacrifice for no reason, or at least agree to the sacrifices that are needed to be put in front and feel that, the end of it's worth it. A lot of people, some people, getting up at 6 a.m. and studying for 4 years isn't worth it for the degree. They feel like, I can go make this money, losing money. I can go make better money doing something else. And they're right. Some people are right about that. So you just have to take that into consideration. Everyone has a different value system in mind of what they value, what are prices that they're willing to pay for it.
So are you saying be clear and articulate what the goal is? Now, to expound on that, I do think being clear about what the goal is, and what I've started to do for myself, not even for anybody else, is I'll write my goal down and I'll have it in different places, whether it's at my computer or sometimes I'll work in the kitchen or in the office, or I'll have an index card and I'll keep it on my person at all times so I can always look at the goal, and that helps me stay on task and just it's a reminder. So maybe that's something that can be incorporated too, is just, okay, well, if you have the goal written down throughout the house, or the goals, and it doesn't necessarily just only have to be a business goal. It could be a family goal. It could be a personal development goal. It could be a lot of things that you want to make sure that your partner is in sync with. And two things I want to say. One, I'm not going to let you do that. One, I'm not going to let you make your deal not sound like a big deal. The first deal that you did on your own, like, oh yeah, it was only $300,000. Like, listen, that's a big deal. That's a major accomplishment. And everyone doesn't do that. And that was your first deal that you did on your own. So kudos to you, man. I want to make sure you don't gloss over that. And the second thing is, well, not most, I would say some men and women, right? Some people aren't necessarily willing to make the sacrifice, but there are a lot of examples of people that are. And it just really depends on what your, like you said, what your value system is in terms of if you want to go nuclear. But just people in general, for listeners, we've had several conversations and episodes about going nuclear, so please check that out. But going nuclear is not for everyone, man. It's really difficult. And so if you're trying to get a partner to go nuclear with you, that's just really hard. And
very hard.
Kudos to the people that get, kudos to the people that are able to get their partners to buy into that. But we talk about that, and the ones that I think do it, especially early on in their early 20s, I think, and they're consistent, I think the payoff is massive, and that's great. But even not, is just trying to figure out how to navigate it. And that's the whole point of this episode, is regardless of whether you're in a relationship that you all can go nuclear or you're getting some level of assistance or none, just being able to really navigate it seamlessly, regardless of what your situation is. That's what we hope, that you walk away listening to this episode. You just have an idea of a game plan, or at least a different train of thought and how to navigate this.
Right. Now, the next thing I would want to say too is, from your standpoint, back to your original question of, do you want your spouse to buy in, or if they're not buying in, part of that buy-in is just going to be the emotional support too, right? The fact that, okay, at the end of the day, if the deal gets away, you put all this work in, you think you're at the finish line, and a broker calls you and said, hey, we need another $1 million. We're going to take this other offer, and you lose your deal, right? And so being able to go back and, have someone who can talk this over, or hear you out, or offer some type of whatever emotional support you need can be pretty important, right? Because it's going to be highs and lows on this journey. And that's part of the journey, is the highs and lows. You can't have it without both of them. But if you got a spouse who's like, I don't want you doing it anyway, or I told you not to do it, or you see, that's what happened, or just compounding it, right? Obviously, that's going to be a more stressful situation than someone whose spouse says, "Oh, I'm sorry, honey, you didn't get it. Come here, let me hold you, let me get you something to eat." Just putting you, I believe in you, you can do it, putting air at your wind, at your back, right? And your cells. Those two will probably get dramatically different results, right? Because one, he has to go back and not only fight with the world, but go back and fight with his spouse. The other one's coming back recharged, ready to do more battle. And so in those situations, I mean, what do you have to say for that?
Ooh, that's a lot, man. That's a lot. That's heavy. In terms of dealing with competitors where one person is getting a lot of support emotionally and the one is not, I would agree. Like that person would be at a disadvantage completely. How do you navigate it? That's tough. I think it comes back down to communication. I think it comes back down to being true to yourself. And I think it comes down to realizing who you are partnered with. And if you know you may get certain responses, it's maybe you tailor a conversation a certain way. One of the things I've learned too is I was guilty of this early on in my career. When I started my first business, I would bring, quote unquote, they say, bring work home, and the stresses of the day I would bring home. And that would create complications because if I was upset about something that happened at work, I would be upset at home. And that's a disruptor too. So that could potentially cause conflict. And so what I've learned to do for myself is I try my best to be even keeled. Like that, what they say, quote unquote, don't get emotional in business. Like try not to get emotional when you're doing a deal. I don't remember what quote that's from. I don't know if it's from a book or from a movie, but that always stood out to me. So I try to do that and I try not to bring work home. And so, or I try to stay even keeled, and that sort of keeps me from needing a certain level of emotional support because I kind of regulate myself in that regard, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's a true solution, but maybe you also have a conversation with your partner about not you, but in general, if that for whoever is in that situation, right? Is, hey, could you maybe encourage me this way? Or I like when you do this, or, that's a little hurtful when you do this, or how does it make you feel when I talk to you about work? Or how does it make you feel when I talk to you about business? Or just opening up those lines of communication to get a better understanding. But to your point with those two examples, yeah, I do think that one person would be at an advantage who's they're being enabled to a degree, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Another thing I would maybe add into that is, there's, well, two things, right? One, they can also, like we've done, where you have a friend that you can go back who's also maybe somewhat involved, which I know it can be pretty tough to find people who, if you're doing small business deals, oh man, yeah, it's going to be even a smaller group, but maybe find some other real estate investors in the area, and that's kind of your group to go to and talk to when things aren't supportive with the spouse. But the other thing too is more of a, I guess, depends upon relationship side, is I guess you kind of have a decision on, if your spouse is that adamant about it, you may need to take a step back and focus and you listen and take that in, right? Because while you may be driving to success, it could ultimately drive a wedge in between you and your spouse, right? Where even though you got successful, she becomes resentful for it. And you get to a point where you end up divorcing, right? Because once you get to success, the only thing you can think about is the resentment you have with her from her being unsupportive to you through the whole process. She's mad with you because you don't listen. And now you've got this big giant wedge that may not be repaired. And so if she's comfortable, you may have to take a step back and maybe try something a little less ambitious that's more aligned with your partner's risk tolerance, as said before. But on that standpoint too, I know it's risky because let's say you don't do it and she still ends up unhappy, right? And you've foregone your dreams. That's a tough place to be in. So just something you'd have to weigh.
Yeah, man, I'm gonna jump out the window and say something a little bit risky, but in the landscape, I very seldom see someone that's attained a high level of success and they're still with the same person that they were quote unquote broke with or starting out with. And so I hone in if I ever see those types of stories. I always hone in on those because that's what I would like to aspire for. That's what I would like to be, is
Mhm.
to be able to have a successful personal life and a successful business. And that's not a knock on anybody that doesn't necessarily have those things, but I rarely or seldom see that in those situations where people might have grown apart, or like you said, there's been massive resentment because there was a focus on the business and not the relationship or the family or whatever it is. And so there aren't a lot of examples of people being able to navigate that well. And it's really difficult from what I see. So that's really interesting. One of the other things you said I wanted to point out about the finding your quote unquote people. I think that was excellent advice because that's definitely something that's helped me too. Is I can't go to certain people and talk about, oh, how hard the real estate market is right now. They're not investing in real estate. They just can't necessarily relate, right? And so that's why you've been, a great friend, a great brother in that regard, because you get it, you understand business, you're doing deals. And so we can talk about the challenges, we can talk about the ups and the downs, right? And so the support is going to look different, and it doesn't have to be the same for every relationship, every friendship, every partnership. It just doesn't have to be the same. So to your point, you might get counsel from a friend or someone else that is doing deals you met at a real estate meetup or a small business acquisition meetup or a friend from college or whatever it is that is doing something similar. It doesn't even necessarily have to be the same industry. Like it could be a painter and you could be in S&B, but just trying to create something, just trying to build something, and someone being able to relate to that, I think is also a key part of how to keep your relationship intact and still have an outlet.
Right. Agreed. Man, and at the end of the day, I mean, if you're married, you said your vows that you till death do your part. You're here to cherish and hold, and all the rest of this stuff. And so, with that comes a responsibility to be sensitive to your spouse. I call it the blue sweater theory, right? Where it may not make sense to you. Your spouse doesn't like blue sweaters, right? There's no rationale behind it, but she just doesn't like blue sweaters. Well, you as her spouse, you have a unique role to be sensitive. And thus, if your spouse doesn't like blue sweaters, you don't wear blue sweaters with her, even though it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And so that's the kind of, I think, burden that you bear as a spouse to be sensitive to those issues. And so she's not with it. There may be a little bit something there. And just to navigate that with the deftness that it requires. And lastly, I guess where we wrap this up, because the last thing just wanted to touch on is that in terms of like distinct roles, right? So have some, households, they got 50-50, 60-40, the man pays the bills. We have different roles in it. Maybe is it just a role thing, right? That something that you think maybe it could also be more palatable to your spouse if you come to it and understand the division of labor, or this is our role in this deal process, saying like, okay, I'm going to go find the deals, make it, and you bake the cookies or something like that. Do you think that could maybe possibly be a solution too? How do you think that would go over?
I mean, if someone could pull it off, great for them. I would say that each person is different, each relationship is different, none are going to be the same. And if you can have that clear cut, division of work, division of roles, then great. I think it also gets complicated when you add kids into the mix because it turns into next person up, next man up. If something needs to get done, try to do it. And there are going to be roles for sure because we get into habits. We're humans. We get into habits. We have expectations, that type of thing. But I don't know if it'll be always a clear cut, well, this is my lane, this is your lane, because sometimes it's going to always be blended a little bit. But what do you think?
I think it's good to divvy up in roles, because one of the things that I've found It's like early on, right? I was, I built the models and stuff like that and evaluating the deal. And she knows nothing about this stuff. So I'm not even going to talk to her about it, right? And later on, I've found as time goes on that I would just simply start asking her, even though she knew nothing about it, still go ask her opinion. Hey, what do you think about this? And, first you'll get the, I don't know about this, or, I don't know. But at times, the fact that I just went and saw and talked to her, it was a chance for us to connect. And she felt valued. And I noticed, some change in terms of their approach towards it, in that she felt more included, that she was more of a part of it, even though it wasn't her real sphere of expertise. And so I would also challenge that, is that, as you go about, don't get too, not saying you have to go to them on everything and say, hey, do this, let me go talk to her first before I do it. But just to seek input, even on the areas where you feel that your spouse may know nothing else about it, right? But it's just a chance to use this as a process to connect with them on another level as well. Because again, at the end of the day, it's about the relationship. And if you can use this as a tool to help build it, why not do that?
That's really, really, really great advice. Making sure that your counterpart feels needed, wanted, cared for, and you're bringing them into what you're doing. I think it's smart and it's good for the relationship. It continues to build a bridge of exactly what you're looking for. So I think that's smart to do that. I don't see any downside on that. So I think it's smart.
Agreed. Well, that brings us to the end of the episode. We could probably go on and on about this, but we just wanted to drop a few nuggets for our listening to think about. Obviously not going to kill Rome in one day, but just something for you to think about as you go about your day. And if you pull one thing out of this, then it was all worth it. But thanks for joining for this episode, and we look forward to hearing you on the next episode, fellas and ladies.